Deep in the heart of southern Africa, beyond the dry hills and whispering grasslands, something ancient sleeps beneath the soil. Not a tomb, nor a ruin, but a memory built of stone. For centuries, travelers passed through the region without ever truly seeing it. They crossed rivers, followed the calls of hornbills, and felt the weight of the sun, but they never noticed the stones that watched them from the hills. Those who lived near them knew better. They spoke of an old city, a city of kings and birds and fire. The locals called it Zimbabwe, the House of Stone. In time, that name would echo across the world as Great Zimbabwe. But long before the textbooks, long before the archaeologists, there were stories whispered around fires. They told of rulers whose voices carried across the valleys, of builders who shaped granite with their bare hands and the patience of gods. For generations, those stories were dismissed as myth, until the world stumbled upon the truth. The year was 1867. A German explorer, Karl Mochich, pushed through the thorn-thick wilderness of Mashonaland, chasing rumors of ancient gold. After days of heat and hunger, he reached a ridge and froze. Rising from the landscape was something no European map had shown, an immense complex of walls, towers, and passageways built entirely of granite. Stones stacked without a drop of mortar. Walls curving like waves, rising high as trees, bending and flowing with the land. He touched the stones and felt their warmth, the memory of centuries soaked into them. But what he could not feel was understanding. His letters home would twist what he saw into myth. He could not believe Africans had built this. Instead, he wrote of Phoenicians, of lost Israelites, of biblical kings who sailed across oceans to carve a city in stone. He said, "This cannot be the work of the natives." And so began the great lie. A lie that would last for generations, that Africa could not build for itself. When British settlers arrived in the late 1800s, they found the ruins and their imaginations caught fire. They searched for gold, not truth. They broke sacred walls, looted artifacts, and replaced history with fantasy. Newspapers in London proclaimed ruins of a lost white civilization found in Africa. Others called it the African Atlantis, or the city of the Queen of Sheba. Anything but what it was. The creation of African hands, African minds, African kings. It was easier to erase the builders than to admit the lie of superiority. For decades, colonial archaeologists defended that fiction. They published books claiming the builders were Arab traders or wandering Europeans. Their evidence? None, except disbelief. Beneath their feet, shards of African pottery were dismissed as coincidence. The oral traditions of the Shona people were ignored. Yet those same Shona could walk through the ruins blindfolded and tell where the king once sat, where the guards once stood, where the sacred fires once burned. They never forgot. The stones themselves never forgot either. Even when stripped bare, they held a language older than speech. Each curve of granite echoed the movement of wind and water. Each narrow passage was designed to amplify voices, carrying them across the hill like a royal command. The great enclosure, its walls 12 meters high, surrounded by silence and mystery, was not just architecture, it was power made visible. From here, rulers watched over a realm that stretched for hundreds of miles. Archaeologists later found beads from India, coins from Arabia, and porcelain from China buried in the soil. Great Zimbabwe had been a hub of trade centuries before Europeans crossed its horizon. Gold flowed from its mines to the Swahili coast, where merchants sailed to Arabia, Persia, and beyond. This was not isolation, it was a network, a living system. Yet even as evidence mounted, the colonial world refused to listen. The truth was too disruptive, because to accept it meant accepting that Africa had its own empires, its own engineers, its own scholars, and that the story of civilization did not begin in Greece, it began everywhere. So the lie persisted. Great Zimbabwe was credited to anyone but Africans. Excavations were censored. Scholars who spoke truth were silenced or exiled. The Rhodesian government even banned books that called Great Zimbabwe African Belt. History itself became an act of rebellion. Yet truth is a patient force. It waits beneath the dust, beneath denial, beneath centuries of empire. In the mid-20th century, African archaeologists began to rise. Men and women who saw in those stones not myth, but heritage. Gertrude Catton Thompson, one of the few who told the truth early on, wrote, "Examination of the site reveals that it is wholly the product of native civilization." Her words were ignored by those in power, but remembered by those who mattered. Slowly, the silence began to crack. Excavations revealed African-style clay huts inside the walls. Carbon dating placed the site between the 11th and 15th centuries. That was long before any foreign contact. And with that evidence, the lie collapsed. Great Zimbabwe stood revealed, the masterpiece of the Shona people. Built by Africans, for Africans, centuries before the world cared to look. But by then, the damage had been done. The name Zimbabwe had become a symbol, both of pride and of what was stolen. When the nation finally broke free from colonial rule, it took that name back. It made it its own again. Today, the bird of Zimbabwe, that ancient soapstone carving found in the ruins, sits on the national flag, a symbol of rebirth. The bird watches the land, just as it did 1,000 years ago. It remembers everything. The empire that was denied, the truth that was buried, the people who never forgot who they were. And if you stand there at sunset, when the granite glows gold and red, you can almost hear them, the echoes of builders, traders, kings, the voices that empire tried to silence. The discovery of Great Zimbabwe was never about ruins. It was about reclaiming a history the world refused to see. Every fallen stone is a testimony, every curve of granite a signature. Together they form a message, carved in silence and endurance. That greatness needs no witness, that truth does not fade with time, and that even after centuries of denial, the stones still speak louder than ever. Before the colonizers ever dreamed of empire, Africa already had its architects, not of marble, but of meaning. The builders of Great Zimbabwe were not slaves, nor workers under a king's whip. They were craftsmen, masons, engineers, people whose skill was their pride. They carved their legacy from granite, stone by stone, until it kissed the sky. Their tools were simple, hammers, wedges, and wisdom. Yet with those, they did what few civilizations could. They built walls that flowed like water, curved like thought, and endured like faith. No cement held them, only precision. Each rock placed so perfectly that a blade of grass could not fit between. The builders studied the lay of the land, shaping their city to the earth's natural rhythm. They knew the secrets of granite, when to split, when to rest, when to rise. The hill complex came first, a fortress in the clouds. It wasn't just defense, it was a statement. From its summit, rulers could see the plains for miles, the herds, the rivers, the roads of dust where traders walked. Below it, the great enclosure grew, a vast labyrinth of curving walls and hidden chambers. Inside, ceremonies unfolded in the flicker of firelight. The air smelled of incense, rain-soaked dust, and the steady hum of voices. The builders moved like shadows, disciplined, deliberate, patient. They worked not for power, but for permanence. Every wall was a conversation between man and nature. Every stone, a syllable in a silent poem that still speaks today. In time, the city expanded beyond stone. Timber huts rose in the valleys, smoke curling into the dawn. Children played among the ruins, even as they were being built. Life and legend wove together in real time, and at the heart of it all was gold. Not greed, but glory, the lifeblood of their trade. Gold flowed from the rivers and hills, carried in baskets, melted into ingots, shaped into ornaments. It glowed in the sun like trapped lightning. Traders came from the Swahili coast, bringing glass beads, silk, and stories of distant lands. In return, they carried gold and ivory back across the sea. Through this, the builders connected the heart of Africa to Arabia, India, even China. The world was smaller than the historians imagined, and Zimbabwe was at its center. The masons who raised those walls also built belief. They saw the world as balance, stone for strength, air for spirit. The narrow corridors of the great enclosure were not random. They channeled sound and movement. When a royal procession passed through, the drums echoed perfectly. It was architecture as music, rhythm in granite. The builders understood symbolism. Circles meant unity, eternity, the cycle of life. You can see it in the walls, in the layout, even in the way sunlight enters certain spaces only on solstice mornings. These were not accidental patterns, they were blueprints of belief. Archaeologists found conical towers with no doors or chambers. Their purpose remains a mystery, but some say they represented grain, wealth, fertility, abundance. Others think they were cosmic symbols of power, reaching toward the heavens. Whatever their meaning, their presence feels deliberate, almost spiritual. And that's what separates Great Zimbabwe from mere ruins. It was not built for survival alone. It was built for significance. Each builder knew that his work would outlive him. Each generation added layers, not of stone alone, but of identity. Women shaped pottery that matched the curves of the walls. Artisans carved soapstone birds, half eagle, half human, the messengers between earth and sky. Those birds were sacred. They were more than decoration. They were emblems of sovereignty. To hold one was to hold the spirit of a nation. And so, when colonizers later stole them, it wasn't theft of art, it was theft of soul. The builders' knowledge extended beyond stone. They understood trade, governance, and astronomy. The placement of the city itself was strategic, close to water, high on granite ridges, invisible from afar. A natural fortress that whispered its strength rather than shouted it. The society they built was complex. A hierarchy of leaders, traders, priests, and artisans, all dependent on one another. Power here was not divine right. It was earned through trust and prosperity. The king was guardian, not God. People offered tribute not from fear, but from faith, because under his rule, their city flourished. By the 14th century, Great Zimbabwe's influence stretched across the plateau. Smaller stone settlements dotted the landscape like stars. Together, they formed a constellation of kingdoms, all connected by trade and shared heritage. They spoke the same language, worshipped the same ancestors, dreamed the same dreams. The empire's heart pulsed in harmony with the land. The builders had found equilibrium, power balanced with purpose. And yet, nothing made by human hands lasts forever. Even the strongest walls eventually crack. As generations passed, the population swelled, resources strained. Gold became both blessing and burden. Trade routes shifted toward the coast. Whispers began of famine, of overgrazing, of drought. The builders who once shaped the land now watched it betray them. But before the decline, there was still greatness. Still laughter in the courtyards, music in the evenings, the scent of smoke and grain. Still craftsmen teaching their sons to balance stones in the old way. Still queens walking the high terraces at dusk, eyes toward the horizon. They must have known something was ending, yet they built anyway, as if defying time itself. Every civilization meets this moment, the edge between glory and forgetting. For Great Zimbabwe, that moment was near. The cracks were small, but they were spreading. The once bustling markets grew quiet. The caravans arrived less often. Still, the builder's spirit endured the belief that what they built was more than walls. It was memory carved into the bones of the earth, a message across centuries that greatness is not measured by empire, but by endurance. Even as their world shifted, their stones remained, waiting, watching, for the next act of history to begin. The sun rose over the granite hills, spilling gold across the plains. Great Zimbabwe shimmered, a living jewel set in the heart of Africa. The air buzzed with the rhythm of trade and song. Smoke from hearths curled above stone walls, and the sound of drums rolled like thunder. This was the golden age, the height of power, pride, and purpose. The city thrived, its heart beating to the rhythm of wealth and wisdom. Merchants arrived from distant lands, from Kilwa, Mombasa, Sefala. They brought fine silks, delicate glass beads, and porcelain as thin as breath. In exchange, they carried back ivory, iron, and the purest gold on the continent. Gold mined from the hills of the Mazo Valley, polished, weighed, and blessed by spirit. It was said that even the rivers gleamed with it, as if the earth itself was proud. But this was no kingdom of greed. The wealth of Great Zimbabwe flowed like its rivers, outward, shared, sustaining. Trade here was ceremony, a dance between trust and ambition. The city's markets overflowed with color. Women in bright cloth sold grain and fruit, beside men trading copper and salt. Children darted through the stalls, laughing, their voices echoing through the enclosures. The scent of roasted millet and burning sage filled the air. At dusk, the streets glowed orange, the walls turning fire red in the setting sun. And above it all, on the hill complex, the king watched. His name was Mutoda, first of the royal line that would shape an empire. Beside him stood his council, elders, priests, traders, and warriors, bound not by blood, but by balance. Their rule was guided by Morai, the god who spoke through rain and wind. When the first storms broke each season, the people gathered in reverence. They sang to the sky, offering beer and grain to the ancestors. It was said that the thunder itself answered the voice of the old ones, blessing the land. Religion and reason walked hand in hand. The priests studied stars as carefully as the farmers studied soil. They charted constellations above the hill complex. They saw patterns in the heavens that mirrored the curves of their city below. Great Zimbabwe was not just a place, it was a reflection of the cosmos. A city built to harmonize with creation itself. The royal court shone with artistry. Goldsmiths hammered ornaments that caught the light like tiny suns. Ivory carvers shaped thrones, staffs, and ceremonial combs. Cloth ironers turned cotton crimson and indigo, the colors of power and fertility. Even sound was crafted, drums tuned to echo through the granite valleys. Their rhythms guided processions, celebrations, and rituals of kingship. When a new ruler rose, the entire city moved as one. Trumpets sounded from the walls. Dancers painted with ash and ochre moved in circles. Elders poured libations onto the stones, an offering to memory. The soapstone birds watched from their perches, guardians of kings and seasons. Their gaze never broke, even as empires elsewhere rose and fell. This was the age when Great Zimbabwe ruled, trade routes stretching to the ocean. Its influence reached Mozambique, Zambia, even into the Congo. Its kings did not need armies to prove strength. Their wealth was enough, silent, radiant power. The name of Zimbabwe carried weight like gold itself. Traders bowed when they spoke it. Chronicles from the Swahili coast described it as a land where kings eat from gold plates. To foreign merchants, it seemed a miracle. But to its people, it was the natural order reward for harmony with the land. The builders' children had become stewards of abundance. There were schools of learning, not of parchment and ink, but of memory and voice. Elders taught history as rhythm, mathematics as rhythm, astronomy as song. Young apprentices memorized the lineage of kings through chant. Knowledge was alive, spoken, sung, and never forgotten. The society thrived not through domination, but cooperation. The queen's word balanced the king's will. Women were traders, advisors, and healers, pillars of continuity. One legend speaks of a queen whose wisdom averted war through a single feast. She invited two rival chiefs to dine beside her, seated between them with silence and grace. By the time the drums ended, their alliance was sealed, not through blood, but through bread. Such was the art of power here, not conquest, but cohesion. The city was not ruled by fear, but by faith and purpose. As the 14th century dawned, Great Zimbabwe was at its zenith. Tens of thousands lived within and around its walls. Cattle grazed across the hills, wealth on four legs. Gold caravans departed each week for the coastal ports. Messengers carried royal seals carved from bone and gold, each bearing the emblem of the sacred bird, half man, half eagle, eternal watcher. The king's council met under moonlight, discussing the stars as maps for destiny. They believed the city's harmony depended on cosmic order. When eclipses came, drums roared through the night to call the sun back. The people waited in awe, And when light returned, they cheered, believing their song had summoned it. Every ritual, every celebration, was a thread binding heaven to earth. It gave meaning to life, and reason to continue building. But within prosperity lies the seed of pride. And pride, history reminds us, has a sharp edge. Gold became temptation as much as blessing. Rival chiefs began to rise, jealous of the king's abundance. Foreign traders demanded more ivory, slaves, tribute. The balance that once defined Zimbabwe began to tilt. Yet, even in the shadow of that coming storm, life pulsed on with grace. The people did not yet see decline, only continuity. The drums still sang each dawn. The market still glimmered with glass beads and gold dust. From the hill complex, the king looked out and saw eternity. He believed his city unshakable. But eternity is a dangerous illusion. Empires fall, not in a single day, but in whispers. A drought here, a trade route lost there. A single wall beginning to crack beneath the weight of time. The warning signs were there, hidden beneath celebration. The golden age of Great Zimbabwe had shone brighter than any before it, and like all great flames, it was destined to fade. But the embers, the ideas, the legacy, the memory would never die. They would glow beneath the ashes, waiting for the next dawn. Every empire believes its walls will last forever. But stone, like memory, cracks under time. The fall of Great Zimbabwe did not come with fire or sword. It came quietly in drought, in hunger, in whispers. The rivers that once fed the plains began to thin. The sky forgot to rain. Cattle, symbols of wealth and life, died in the fields. The grain stores emptied faster than they filled. The land that had given so much began to turn against its children. And with every dry season, the songs of abundance grew softer. The traders noticed first. Caravans that once glimmered with gold slowed to a trickle. The Swahili ports, restless for profit, shifted their gaze north. Sofala turned toward. New powers rising along the coast. Great Zimbabwe, the giant of the interior, began to fade from the world's map. Its silence was mistaken for death. Yet within those walls, life still clung on. Families refused to abandon the city of their ancestors. They prayed, they rebuilt, they waited for the rains. But the heavens did not answer. The soil, once rich and generous, had been exhausted by centuries of use. The forests were cut, the game scattered. What had been balanced became burden. Prosperity had devoured its roots. As scarcity spread, so did tension. Rival chiefs rose, each claiming the blessing of Moeri. The king's authority fractured like the granite beneath his throne. Loyalty turned to ambition. The trade routes that once carried gold now carried rumors of betrayal, of theft, of rebellion. Even faith began to tremble. When the rains finally came, they came to hard. Rivers overflowed, washing away homes and harvests alike. It was as if the earth was reclaiming what it had lent. The city's foundations, once its pride, became its prison. Slowly, the people began to leave, one family at a time. They carried what they could, pots, tools, memories. They left behind the walls that had once defined them. By the mid-15th century, the great enclosure stood half empty. The markets fell silent. The last fires on the hill burned low. And the birds, those sacred guardians of stone, watched their people disappear into the distance. Some went north, following the rivers into the Zambezi Valley. Others migrated south, toward fertile lands that would one day form new kingdoms. Mutapa, Torwa, Rosvi. The legacy of Zimbabwe lived on through them. But the city itself fell into sleep. The jungle crept closer, vines curling over the stones. Rain softened the carvings. Wind hollowed the walls. What remained was silence, a cathedral of absence. For centuries, the ruins stood alone, forgotten by the outside world, but remembered by the local Shona. They still came to pray at the hill. They left offerings of beer and grain to honor the ancestors. The spirits of the builders were never gone. They waited, watching as the world turned and empires shifted elsewhere. And then, in the 19th century, strangers returned. But they did not come to honor, they came to claim. European explorers arrived with notebooks and arrogance. They saw the walls, the towers, the artistry, and refused to believe their eyes. This cannot be African, they said. These people could not have built this. So they invented a story. They decided Great Zimbabwe must have been built by outsiders, Arabs, Phoenicians, even the lost tribes of Israel. Anything but the truth, anything but African genius. They called the ruins evidence of a vanished white race. Colonial governments printed it as fact. Museums filled with stolen artifacts, the sacred birds, pottery, tools. Yet the heart of the city remained unclaimed because its soul was still here. The real erasure came through education. In schools, African children were told their ancestors were savages, that civilization came from elsewhere, that their history began with conquest, not creation. But the stones disagreed. The stones had seen too much. Beneath the lies, truth waited, patient, unbroken. When archaeologists returned in the 20th century with science instead of prejudice, they began to see clearly. Carbon dating proved the ruins were centuries older than European contact. Pottery shards matched those still made in local villages. Oral histories aligned perfectly with the archaeology. The evidence was undeniable. The builders were African, and yet, even confronted with truth, colonial powers resisted. Admitting the origins of Great Zimbabwe meant rewriting the myth of European superiority. For them, the ruins were not just history, they were heresy. So for decades, the lie persisted in textbooks, newspapers, and policy. Only after independence did the truth find its voice again. The new nation took the name Zimbabwe, reclaiming what had been stolen. The soapstone bird returned home, lifted from its exile in foreign museums. It became a symbol of rebirth, grace, and defiance. The people once silenced now spoke with pride. The ruins, once buried, now stood as monuments to endurance. But history still carries scars. The world remembers the lies more easily than the truth. Even now, some dismiss the genius of ancient Africa. They see the stones but not the spirit that built them. Yet those who stand among the ruins know better. You can feel the hum of something eternal beneath your feet. The air thick with memory, the stones warm with ghost light. It's as if the builders are still here, whispering, "We were always more than what they said." The fall of Great Zimbabwe was not the end. It was a transformation from kingdom to legend, from silence to truth reborn. Dawn breaks over the ruins once more. The granite walls glow gold, as if the stones themselves remember the light. Centuries have passed since the last king's voice echoed here. Yet Great Zimbabwe lives, not as ruin, but as resurrection. The land has changed, the borders renamed, the flags replaced. But beneath it all, the heartbeat of the ancestors still thrums in the soil. When independence came, it was not merely political, it was spiritual. A nation chose a name whispered by the stones, Zimbabwe. It was an act of reclamation, the past made present again. The city that had been denied became the foundation of identity. The soapstone bird returned from exile, its wings scarred but unbroken. It rose upon a new flag, watching once more over its people. The same bird that had seen kings crowned now soared above a republic. Its flight, a symbol of endurance beyond empire. Schools began to teach what had long been silenced. Children learned that greatness was not imported, it was inherited. Archaeologists, historians, poets, and elders came together. Each carried a piece of the puzzle, and together they rebuilt memory. The stones were mapped and preserved, but more importantly, they were understood for the first time. African scholars led this story. The narrative was no longer translated through colonial lenses. Great Zimbabwe was revealed not as mystery, but as mirror, a reflection of what Africa had been and what it could be again. Today, visitors walk the same winding paths once traced by kings and masons. They touch the granite and feel its warmth, realizing history is alive beneath their palms. Tour guides speak with reverence. Elders still pour beer to the ancestors at the hill. The sacred birds stand again in their rightful place, facing sunrise. Their eyes catch the morning light, silent, eternal witnesses. In the nearby villages, the Shona people still sing the old songs. They speak of builders who dreamed in stone and ruled through wisdom. The rhythm of drums, once used for coronations, now opens festivals of remembrance. Every beat is both heartbeat and echo. Artists carve new birds from soapstone, each different, yet born of the same idea: endurance through creation. Writers craft poems, comparing the granite walls to the human spirit, cracked, weathered, but unbroken. The ruins have become a university of identity. Lessons carved not in ink, but in endurance. In a world obsessed with speed, Great Zimbabwe teaches patience. In a world divided by borders, it teaches belonging without walls. For the people who descend from its builders, it is more than heritage. It is proof. Proof that Africa has always been capable of brilliance. Proof that civilization wears many faces, and this one, carved in stone, is unmistakably African. The rediscovery of that truth changed how a continent saw itself. Across Africa, other ruins stirred. Mapamubwe, Kilwa, Benin-Aksum. Forgotten empires began to speak again, their silence broken by pride. Great Zimbabwe became their elder, the one that survived erasure. Its story traveled through classrooms, documentaries, and song. Musicians invoked its rhythm. Painters captured its glow at dusk, that soft fire across stone. Even scientists studied the precision of its architecture, amazed by its geometry and acoustic design. What once was dismissed as primitive was now hailed as genius. The ruins no longer symbolized mystery, they symbolized mastery, and with that, history itself began to heal. But the legacy of Great Zimbabwe is not nostalgia, it's instruction. It reminds every generation that truth can be buried, but never destroyed. That power built on lies will crumble, but pride built on truth will endure. The builders may be gone, yet their philosophy remains etched in every wall. Build with balance. Lead with wisdom. Remember who you are. These were their commandments, not written, but lived. Their echoes still guide those who listen. And beyond the physical sight, Great Zimbabwe exists in the unseen, in music, in language, in resilience. Its stones are metaphors for people who refuse to vanish. Every generation that remembers adds another layer to the monument. Each storyteller becomes a builder reborn. The city, once denied, has become eternal precisely because it was rediscovered by truth. History no longer whispers, it sings. The same sun that warmed the masons still rises over their work. The same wind that carried the scent of gold still carries the songs of children at play. Time has weathered the granite, but not the message. Greatness is not conquered, it is continued. In Harare's museums, the soapstone birds are guarded behind glass. Yet every Zimbabwean knows their true home is the hill where they first watched on. When school children visit, they fall silent, not out of fear, but awe. They see their reflection in the stones and realize, this is who we are. This is where strength begins, not in conquest, but in creation. Not in dominance, but in design. The story of Great Zimbabwe has outlived its destroyers. It has outlasted empire, racism, and erasure. It stands for the idea that truth, once unearthed, cannot be buried again. That identity, once reclaimed, cannot be stolen twice. And so, the stones continue their vigil. Through rain, through drought, through the rise and fall of nations. They wait, not for rediscovery, but for understanding, for a world ready to listen without arrogance. Because the lesson of Great Zimbabwe is larger than Africa. It belongs to all who have been silenced, all who have been told their history began with someone else's arrival. The stones whisper, write your own beginning, name your own greatness. Stand where your ancestors stood and know you are enough. The ruins may be ancient, but their message is timeless. The builders are gone, but their dream is fulfilled each time someone remembers. Great Zimbabwe is no longer a mystery to solve. It is a truth to honor, a testament to the resilience of culture, the defiance of memory, and the eternity of creation. And as the sun sets behind the great enclosure, the granite turns to fire once more. The birds look west, wings lifted against the fading light, and the stones, at last, whisper not of loss, but of legacy.